speaker, night 2. Who's at town hall tonight?
Planning board.
Planning board.
Their public hearing on those proposed zoning bylaw changes to go to town meeting.
Okay. I'm sure those are exciting.
What about like vehicle extra votes or something?
There's a whole host of
A lot of them.
bylaw changes.
All right, well, that'll be one thing to talk about at town meeting, as with the budget, as with CP. Anything else?
Okay.
Do you have
Fine, I'll look, yeah.
For everything but a pen. Oh, I got one, thank you.
Oh, good.
So- Thank you.
I'm a pessimist, I always use a pencil. You're an optimist accountant.
Okay, so we're as full as we're gonna get tonight. David's not joining us, as he has a conflict. And the agenda is wide open for budget discussion. So the purpose of our getting together this evening is to discuss the budget, in particular, the above-level services asks. So we've been through most all of our department head presentations, both initially with the Board of Selectmen, at least some of us, and then as a full committee, dedicated to working with all the departments over the past few weeks, save for the joint Hamilton departments, which we have on the agenda for the 11th, next Monday, and we're at Town Hall for that.
Yep.
For those who wish to join, other than us. And then, of course, on Thursday, also at Town Hall, the 14th, we'll reconvene with the Board of Selectmen and discuss this same topic of the above-level services requests and those which we might consider including in the budget. So tonight's pretty open discussion. We have the list, thanks to Peter and Patty, putting these in an Excel form, and it also includes the kind of high-level prioritization that's been provided by the Board of Selectmen back to the town administrator. And certainly any other questions or concerns or thoughts that people have on the budget in general, to the extent that now, it's the right time to discuss them. Warrant structure, where we are in the process, big picture, that's, it's, I think, a fine enough time. So that's why we're here. So I think so the way I view the discussion tonight on each of the line items on these, and Patty, you provided it again as well, right? That printout, thank you.
Yep.
Alex, may I ask a
course.
off-the-wall question?
Go for it, Mike.
It won't get traction, but I'm just asking.
Shoot.
I know last year we struggled and had an override. This year we're struggling. We'll probably have another override. Next year, looks like the same thing. I guess the question I'm having is, if we're going to go through the overrides, is there a way to get well, i.e., why don't we just ask what we need to get well? I know the problem with that is your tax bill or tax rate would probably go really high, which would cause a problem, but we seem to, because one of the items I know we'll bring up is, one of the things that's near and dear is all the capital stuff that we're not doing that only adds up later. It's happened before. Then you end up paying twice as more later. So I guess my question is still asking, if you're going for an override anyway, is there a way to just to say, well, I am going to add more to this? I know it's not level service, and it's a way of getting well. It was just a question or comment, that's all.
Right, so I think, yeah, put another way, it's like if you're gonna go for an override, do you potentially request more in the form of levy capacity
Yep.
from the taxpayers, other than that which you identify for level services, including funding the full Wenham apportionment for the school portion that we owe, and any other items, potentially. And I think, Peter, you had brought this up before about
I brought it up.
free
I
cash.
brought it up about last year.
Yeah, last year, yeah.
When we were first having the discussion about
Right.
the override, and it was clear that we were going to need one. I had suggested, to your point, that in doing so, we were making a strategic decision knowing that this coming year, when we're here, we're gonna be talking about an override again. And that likely was gonna be the case over at least the next few years until, you know, the effects of the enrollment shift subside. We have some non-excluded debt dropping off, 21. So there's, you know, we've got some pretty significant developments coming online, so perhaps new growth could track up. So that, you know, there is some relief on the horizon, but short term, certainly next year, the following year, we're gonna be talking about an override again, even, you know, at where we're proposing to fund it this year. I think we're, you know, obviously in a little different position for FY20 than we were for 19. We still were funding all our capital, and we felt pretty comfortable with the level of services that we were providing on the town side. And the school was separate override. This year, we're cutting really to the bone on the town side. We're not funding capital. And just meeting our immediate needs in terms of funding the school budget. And then to Alex's point, you know, it's something I've raised probably for the past 3 or 4 years. You know, when you step back and take a look at the big picture, we have a structural deficit. We've become reliant on one-time funds. Still the case, and I think if realistically to put ourselves in a better position long-term, you need to back out some of that reliance on free cash. I'm not saying that you can't have any, but I think certainly the amount, you know, it's been at 750 now, 4 years, we're dropping it down to 700 this year, basically because we don't have 750 available. I think that should realistically be cut in half. That's about historically the amount of free cash that we had used to subsidize the budget, reduce the tax rate, whatever you want to say, up until about 5 years ago. And that is, you know, probably an amount that we could rely on, you know, on a year-over-year basis, because, you know, if it's $350,000, you leave a $250,000 balance per the town's policy. That's $600,000 of free cash. I can't see a place where we would be getting that low.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think they're strategically long-term, you should be talking about
I'm gonna do a
more than just getting by, kind of
Year to year.
living hand to mouth.
Right, because I'm gonna do a contradiction of terms, argue with myself. I hate taxes.
Yeah.
I hate the taxes going up,
Right.
but we're on,
Right.
we're on, almost on life support.
We are, yeah. We're not even level services. I mean, we're running lean to begin with year to
Yep.
year. It's a good question you raise. You did bring it up last year about reducing our reliance. So just to, how it plays out, you reduce the dependency, you use less in the form of free cash, you absorb it on the operating budget. The ask goes up relative to levy limit, you got a bigger override, right? I mean, it comes in the form of including more expenses in the budget, right?
Yeah, so
Essentially, you
yeah,
fund more.
right, so it's the equivalent of adding expenses when you
Right.
reduce your reliance on that revenue source. So, you know, I think if you were looking, you know, we talked about, you know, just kind of playing the scenario out. Your override is $200,000 on the town side, separate from the schools.
Yep.
At that point, you say, you know, we should really back out $300,000 of free cash on the revenue side, and it's a $500,000 operating override. That then
Right.
sets you up in a better position for next year.
As long as we're not,
And it also allows you to fund capital.
as long as we're not doing deficit funding, that's fine. Right, okay.
Yep. Good points.
Yeah, right, you don't get yourself out of that situation only to put yourself back in.
Right,
Right.
make it worse.
And in terms of the time series, thinking about where we've been, what led to the very dire fiscal situation that we were in last year, worse yet for FY20, is of course the reliance upon one-time funds and the school enrollment shift, which even though there's, you know, help on the way in the form of, you know, a reduced impact to the town of Wenham relative to Hamilton that we know of historically playing out over the rolling averages, you never know where it's gonna go in 5 years or 6 years.
Sure, and I guess my point is not, we're gonna get relief. It's
Right.
gonna be, you know,
Normalized.
neutral.
Exactly, right.
We're not gonna be, you know.
May or
we're
may
on,
not shift
like,
the other
where
way.
we've been, where Hamilton's been over the past 5 years,
That's
which
right.
is the, you know, this tremendous increase in capacity. It's more just, we're not gonna be benefiting, you know, and nor is Hamilton from, you know, it looks like it's gonna be pretty static, so, I mean, but to your point, we'll see how it plays out. That's just what they're projecting right now.
It was just food for thought.
And so that was certainly, when we started talking to the board about this, how to approach this budget process for FY '20 from a policy perspective, that was one of the things that was put on the table. Ultimately, where they ended up was they felt like they wanted to do, you know, stay with a very minimal level services town budget, same as they did last year, see what they could fit in terms of school costs, which is
So
where we are now.
we're talking about the Board of Selectmen.
Or selectmen.
Yeah.
You're
I
talking about
think,
what?
I think it's worth staying,
Wenham BOS decision, sorry,
That's
to,
okay.
to have a level services budget, bare bones on the town side, given that it's such a small percentage of the school's assessment that we can fund anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, the.
1.5%.
Yeah, but where we started was, operating override for level services for the town and for the school.
Right,
That was the position that we started. But that's not where it has evolved to over the past few months. Doesn't mean it's not worth having that discussion again, you know, when you circle back with the board next Thursday night. If that's
Sure.
where the committee ends up.
I perturbed you, think, sorry.
question, sorry, Carrie.
I support maintaining like the minimal level services and policy decision this year and similar to what we did last year. Because I think unless I'm not understanding the outlook in the next 5 years or so, you know, we're gonna have increasing pressures on the budget and need to figure out if we want to go ahead and raise taxes to do that or consider more significant structural changes in how the town's run. And I would like to get more input from the taxpayers and the citizens of Wenham to figure out if we want to, and the board, if we want to just do more significant restructuring in the town and how it's run to reduce some of that pressure or increase taxes.
Right, so to the extent you can get feedback from the taxpayers, I think that's always helpful.
And-
But it's oftentimes just at the kind of culmination of, you know, annual town meeting, yay or nay on overrides, and that's your opportunity to educate them. I mean,
And I think the longer we have this situation and the more, you know, this will be the second year in a row that taxes go up, it'll catch people's attention more when they start feeling the squeeze, and then they may engage more. And also, I would just like to add to anyone listening or watching, we encourage the people of Wenham to ask us any questions at any time and to get engaged. We welcome.
Sure, there's a couple extra seats that people could join. We can fit 2 or 3 more. No, absolutely.
After a few more overrides, they may come.
Well, and just to clarify, we raise taxes every year in the situation we're in. It's whether or
Yes,
not we.
I should be more explicit and talk about in an override capacity, yeah.
Right, and I think that that's one thing I think about is the binary element of override or not. And then when we're in a definitive yes scenario, as we are this year, without a doubt, it's a matter of the level, the relative level of it, or
Yep.
the bifurcation of town versus schools.
Yep.
And that gets, I think, extremely complicated for us and for BOS to get our heads around how we'd structure it. Not to say we couldn't do it in the way we felt was most appropriate, but for residents come town meeting, when realistically, by and large, that's when they're looking at the warrant, looking at the report, and making their determination. Not to say that that should be the reason not to do it, and we can have budget forums and educate and perform the outreach necessary, but it does get tricky when you start weighing town and/or various combinations of school overrides.
And that
Which I
was-
suspect is one of the reasons why the BOS wants to kind of status quo from the standpoint of article structure, level services, override predominantly on the school side, not to say that it couldn't include some of this.
Yep. But one of the decision points early on in that discussion was, if there was going to be the need for an override or overrides, whether they should be pulled apart, have a town and a school, or whether they should be combined in one. And there's, a whole host of considerations there, both kind of strategic and political for doing it either way.
Right.
I think part of the feedback that the board gave when that was raised was the fact that at least last year, when the school operating override was clearly moving forward, we, FinCom, BOS, had asked for some feedback from the school administration leadership about what would be cut if the override failed. And we didn't, that information wasn't provided to us. And I think the board felt pretty strongly that if we were going to move forward with a town operating override, that we certainly would be providing that information to the residents to help them make that decision. But we couldn't assure ourselves that the schools would.
Right.
So coupling them together, where the town was saying, this is what's going to get cut, and the schools were just saying, this is the number, makes it a little more complicated.
Yeah, for the record, I consider that a budgeting 101 issue is you should always be fully transparent in what you're gonna get with money and what you're not gonna get if, the overrides don't go through. And hopefully we'll have all that transparency this year.
Yeah, and I don't know that it will. I know, at the last school committee meeting, I'm sure you have all seen that one-page sheet
Yes.
that was discussed at length by the school committee in terms of some potential cuts. I don't know if that's what they're gonna be proposing in terms of information to our residents about what would happen if the override wasn't approved. It's pretty close to the amount that the school
Yeah.
budget would have to be cut in order to fit within our levy limit. I think they talked about $1.4+ million, and
Yeah,
this
it's
is
like
1.3 and change.
yeah.
So I don't
Yep.
know if that was coincidental or not, but it might be a little bit different this year in going through that process. We didn't really get that last night from our discussion.
Yeah, not much has changed. We didn't talk about that last night, the schools, which makes sense. I mean, they're not proposed cuts, they're not recommended cuts.
Yep.
With that said, it's a list that's been assembled, and even if it's nothing else, the school committee has it as an artifact and might consider some, any, none of those elements in their adopting of the final budget, right? At their second hearing, right?
Yeah, and ultimately,
They do or don't.
school district budget is a bottom line budget.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they can
Right.
say, this is, what would be cut, but they have full discretion over what that eventually would be.
Right.
My impression, that's just my impression, that the school budget will be marginally reduced, if at all.
I think it's a fair assessment, yeah. I mean,
So I think we'll be facing the amount that we're gonna have to, for the school override, based upon that budget.
Just talking about the kind of big picture structuring of warrant articles and so forth, particularly around the school budget, and obviously, fair amount of discussion outside of their level service budget was really, there was a fair amount of talk about special education and those increasing costs, but it was a lot about OPEB and the SRO, kind of this level service plus. And I know early on in my conversations with the Board of Selectmen about how to structure the warrant articles, I had initially put a placeholder for carving those out separately as a standalone warrant article above the level services. I heard today from at least one member of the board who was interested in revisiting that concept, and really putting it on the schools to sell OPEB in particular. I think also given the difference of opinion between Hamilton and the schools about where the SRO should be funded, that might be a way to resolve that if that was a separate, or the SRO specifically was a separate article. I mean, if Hamilton's including it in their budget and the schools are including it in their budget.
Befuddled.
Right, and I probably wasn't clear that it was gonna be resolved in the next week.
It strikes me as odd there doesn't seem to be any appetite to resolve it, or a
Yeah, it's been
current
discussed.
initiative. I mean, beyond just it's not a stalemate, but accepting the SRO in each other's budget, or in one's budget,
Because I think both entities,
have it in their budget.
well, both entities have it in their budget, both entities want the position. So you
Correct.
think that it would be in their interest to resolve that so that there wasn't any confusion and there was full support for funding it.
Correct.
So just something to consider, probably best talked about at the joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen next Thursday.
Given
But-
article structures in their purview, and if they
Yeah,
want to
and,
revisit, I
you know,
think we should.
Selectmen, that's ultimately their policy decision, but
Yep.
it might be helpful for the, FinCom just to think about it between now and then. So we'd be prepared to talk about it.
We should also be thinking about the potential for a stabilization fund for
Mm.
enrollment shift, right? You have sent materials, I have yet to review them. I believe you provided some
I
of the
did.
state statutes and how that all works.
And I think that is something else that should be discussed. I mean,
Right.
I think when we talked about it last, Mike brought up a fair point, which is, it's another name, but it's just
Yeah.
it's an override. It's not really addressing anything
Right.
long-term.
Right.
But it is, carving out some additional capacity potentially to fund capital this year without a debt exclusion, because we couldn't really do a debt exclusion for capital, given the capital needs that we have.
Right.
Or maybe a way to, do a mix of these priority items that we've talked about without, cutting
taking
it,
from the other.
increasing the school operating override that much more.
Right.
Did I catch it right that Hamilton has it already a stabilization fund?
Different.
Oh, it's a
They
different.
have a general stabilization
Oh,
fund, as do
oh.
we. We
Yeah.
have about a little over $500,000 in there.
Okay, my bad.
But they have a capital stabilization fund that I think recently created, that they're transferring free cash to build up, and then they have a general stabilization fund that they're trying to increase the balance, to be more in line with best practices. But no, this special purpose stabilization fund will be something new and unique to us.
Right. And while it is just taking money from the present, from the taxpayers at present, and allocating it towards the next year's cost, and in the process, adding to the override, it's kind of in good faith insofar as it's obviously restricted purpose for that. But also, the lack of permanence on the levy limit,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it
That's
drops
it.
down, so you're saying to the taxpayers that
We'll use it when we
we'll
need
use it when we need it,
Right.
and you won't be forever paying this dollar amount of levy limit.
Which is different than the
It's year to
school
year.
operating override, right?
Of course.
Right,
If
that's
we move forward with a
permanent increase, yeah.
$556,000, once that's voted, that's there. The 331 from last year is there forever.
Yep.
I think technically you can lower your levy limit, but you need to go through a whole voting process.
Yeah, that underride, that
like-
never happened.
Yeah,
Yes.
the
My
underride, yes,
finance
I think it's
books.
on the books.
In theory, it can happen, and that would be nice. So, quickly on the stabilization fund, I have not dug into it. Have you, or has anyone else looked at it and have any other opinions on
Only
it?
about, only
that you
about a
wanna
quarter of the way.
Go
Sorry.
on record
I
on?
can't.
We had the one printout that's in blue ink, right? Was there
Yep.
something else?
Yep, nope,
Yeah.
just a couple
Okay.
pages. It's a,
Quick and dirty on it.
IGR from the deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yep. And I lost my train of thought on something else.
I mean, the benefit, in my opinion, the greatest benefit to having the special stabilization fund is that it doesn't increase the levy limit. But with the demographics changing, I don't know if that's gonna level out and how much of a need there is for it over time.
Right,
And if
so.
the money's there, can you transfer it out or you can't?
No, you would have to use it for that specific purpose.
For increases in our budget related to the assessment, further related to a positive and shift, right?
Yeah.
And that
and,
only,
you know,
presumably.
I mean, what it would do, so it's not gonna change a lot short term. But long term, it is gonna put us in a position to be better prepared to weather the
Right.
major enrollment shifts and have a reserve there available to tap into when that tide does change, and we know it will. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, well, in the spirit of like fiscal responsibility, I mean, it's smart to consider, at least, even if it's not totally affordable. The size of the override strikes me too. I mean, that's another, as a taxpayer, even just, voting on an override at town meeting. Well, last year, I recall, we had an override, right? And that was 331,000, right? This year, we're looking at 570?
559 right now.
560?
Yeah.
So we're up meaningfully. We're nearly double that level of override for, again, a level services, bare bones on the town side budget with level services plus, again, on the school side, OPEB at the request largely of Hamilton and Wenham. I believe, I expressed general support of it last night. I remain supportive to some extent. However, the school's not investing in the educational programs that they want to, right? Presumably, I mean, they'd rather spend $250 on something other than OPEB if they could. And I think most, parents and residents of the community would also like to see that money going towards further, bolstering the quality of the education. Problem is, we've got contractual arrangements that lead to significant retiree health care benefit costs that are out of control, as are other components. And we've got half our budget increasing at a rate of 7-ish%, 7 to 9%, inclusive of the shift. And if we back that out, we're still looking at a 5-6% annual increase in what is now over half of our budget without the corresponding revenue growth.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's happened, they presented the data last night, it's been
Yeah.
8.5% over the past 5 years, and that's inclusive of the
Inclusive of
enrollment
the shift, but yeah.
But even backing out the shift,
Right.
it's still 5+% year over year.
Level services.
Yeah,
Or level services plus their critical stuff. And
last year.
3 to 4, right, last year. 4 anyways. So that is putting us in the structural deficit, major fiscal situation that we're in.
So just to
Jim?
just to clarify then, this most recent, the over-level services
Yep.
request for the town departments. If we approved all of this,
Yep.
just as an example, that would put us, in addition, another 300 and something thousand over.
Yeah,
Levy.
so this is, about $350,000. What's the deal with the total?
330, 329 and change.
But that includes the capital, so you're talking
Yeah.
about the capital and the other items are somewhere in the $300,000 and $325,000 range.
Yeah,
It's like
so
180
we
and
do
170.
not have,
Right.
basically, we have $135,000 of levy capacity that we're currently funding the school budget from, that we could hypothetically substitute some of these in without necessitating a town operating override.
Yeah. And then increase Article 3.
It would increase, yeah, anything
Yes.
that gets added in, which is what I tried to communicate yesterday, that 559 was kind of like, that's the least it's gonna be, the
Yep.
school operating override. So any of these items that gets added in the town's operating budget for next year is corresponding increase to the amount of the school operating override.
Is that 1.4% of the increase? Is that what it corresponds with? Yeah, of course, right, because on 10 million? No, is that right?
So,
That sounds nice.
so just to clarify one more time, for example, if we approved, for example, the driver operator for $50,000, that goes in fully at the 50,000 and not at some percentage, because it's our costs that are being transferred over.
Correct.
Right.
It's not like it's a 1/3, 2/3 thing. This is
Right.
it gets fully loaded into the school budget.
And that 50,000 is actually 57,000 with, fully loaded with insurance benefits
Well, the
that we would
insurance-
have to.
I'm just using that as an
Yeah, but
example,
just
just
to-
to,
Not
how this
57, I'm sorry,
works. Okay.
67,000.
Okay, and just one more question about, so this is the first time, which is helpful, to see the medium, high, low. So this was set with the Board of Selectmen, is that
Yeah,
correct?
so they each submitted their own individual responses, which I then aggregated and shared
Okay.
out. And this is kind of their
Is this a
collective-
consensus of the three selectmen?
Yeah, I'd say there was very little, in the end, very little difference of opinion. So there wasn't a lot of, somebody gave high, somebody
Right,
gave low,
right,
it ended up at a medium.
Okay.
Generally, they were all around the
More or
same.
less in line.
And just one other quick question about some of these requests from police and fire. Do any of these affect the police accreditation,
No,
for example?
they do not.
Or there's no accreditation in the fire department at this point, is that right?
No, there's, the police are an accredited department now. They've been so for a little over 3 years. They went through the reaccreditation process over the summer and into this fall. They received that reaccreditation. None of these issues would, none of these funding requests would impact
Accreditation.
that status.
Although two of them at our briefing with the department they did say it was high, and that's probably why they're high on here, just related to safety.
That's for the fire department. He was talking about the police department.
Oh, I'm sorry. Computers.
Protective gear and air packs.
Yes.
Yeah, I was looking
yeah,
at fire department, yeah.
It's different.
Yep.
So one of my other just general thoughts is, only being on the finance committee for a year or so, but how do we, going forward, if we defer, let's say we've deferred this whole list, just as an example, it's gonna come back at some point in the future.
Well,
It's gonna come back next year.
Yeah, the capital certainly will.
The capital
None-
will, but
None of those capital needs are gonna go away. Yeah, I mean, this was not by any means intended to be a wish list. This
No,
wasn't meant
no.
to be aspirational. This is really,
this is kind of an opportunity list because of some unique situations in the community and the departments.
Yep.
In the sense of what's occurring this year, as well as the capital issues. And the capital issues, some of these capital issues we've already committed to.
no, none of these on the list on the second page. I got rid of the first iteration.
Yeah, the first
of this-
iteration, we
of
had capital
this list.
commitments, right?
Had some capital items that we had prior contractual obligations to maintain.
About
Those
100
have
and-
been subsumed in the operating budget.
That
We have to pay for them.
100,000 or so
Okay.
is in
I
there.
don't want
Less
to
space.
give anybody the
Yeah.
impression that we didn't have that choice.
Okay.
So that's off the list.
Yep.
That's off.
These are all just the new
Yep.
capital needs.
Yep.
Because you already have the lease, you gotta,
Yeah,
gotcha.
exactly.
Yep.
Thank you.
If none of this were funded, would it represent service cuts in any way, shape, or form? Would it be below level services, technically speaking, because of free cash funding of non-capital items
So I
last year?
think probably the only thing that we could say would be a reduction to the level of services would be the highway road capital.
Would be the what? The highway?
Highway road capital.
Where's,
Now,
So that's on the second page.
from our, that's a 50,000.
Correct.
And
Right.
so, if I understood it correctly from our discussion the other day, Peter, that even though it's a new request, it was in the operating budget
So
in the past, for
so
last
last
year.
year, it was funded, $40,000 out of the operating budget.
Yep.
$45,000 out of free cash.
Okay,
And we have, over the past several years, increased our commitment to that by $5,000 a year.
yeah.
So at bare minimum, $85,000 would represent level services in that line.
Yep.
But because we had free cash to fund it from last year, and we have no contractual obligation to fund it this year, we kept it at the $40,000 on the operating budget side.
And-
And, you know, that $50,000 going up to 90 for next year is a value added. But
And we aren't-
realistically is gonna reflect,
And we aren't taking that 50,000, or don't have the opportunity to take that 50,000 out of free cash.
right,
Right.
correct.
Yeah, that one, that you've got detailed, and that's one of the more nuanced ones, and the issue when you start paying with things in free cash, when you can't forever, and then you try and figure out what the hell's going on the next year, when you need to creep items back into the operating budget,
Yep.
gets, definitely gets confusing. Road repair in general, is that what that 50 goes
Yeah.
towards?
Exactly. And there are some other items, particularly on the expenses, you know, tree planting, no, that's not a reduction, but they have had funding for it. We've been long talking about, you know, trying to make a commitment to that. We have made some headway this current fiscal year. Similarly, the next item below, the part-time consultant to work on the Wenham Connects Age and Dementia-Friendly initiative. We have somebody in place doing that now through a grant
Grant funding, yeah.
at 8 hours a week. So technically not a service reduction because we didn't have that person, you know, until last April. But nonetheless, you know, it's something that we have had in place and we believe is important to keep in place.
Could I clarify also the discussion on the, not clarify, but I just want to kind of review it in my own head, the whole issue of if we moved away from a loose leaf pickup. My understanding from Mr. Tyak's discussion was that that would reduce some of the costs in here particularly.
So
And
it would
Not
do,
that it'd be
it would do,
budget-
it would do two things.
Yep.
It would save the town a minimum of $40,000 net in expenses that are currently budgeted for FY '20. And it would reduce the need for the DPW to hire this new full-time driver operator.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Right, so
So-
that 50,000, if, I don't know whether we vote on that leaf pickup, I don't know what the procedure is for that, Alex, but do we make a recommendation?
Well, yeah,
not
so
move-
what you would.
Because that seems to have that would have a significant impact
There's
on some of these
a lot of
lines here.
implications of that item that we probably will discuss next week with the Board of
With the
Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen, okay.
Yeah, on the 14th.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that from Bill's presentation the
Yeah,
other night.
no, you're right, that's an important one.
Yeah, but we can, I mean, there's really three decisions, or three possible scenarios. You could either, cut loose leaf pickup and not add the new staff person and save $40,000 a year on the operating
Yep.
budget. Or you could keep loose leaf pickup and not hire the new full-time driver operator and basically not impact the operating budget at all. It would be where it is now is where it would remain.
Right.
Or you could keep loose leaf pickup and add the new position and increase our budget by $50,000.
$50,000.
So there's a $90,000 swing there
Yeah.
Yeah.
based on those kind of three scenarios and where we end up.
With the middle one being obvious on the surface, but then we recall Bill's comments about how it takes his whole crew 2 months and they're missing out on other work and having to outsource more at a cost.
And it's,
so
and it's not kind of this general, we need to outsource more.
Yeah.
In this particular instance,
Okay.
it's, we could pay Weston and Sampson $10,000 a year to do stormwater compliance, and we could do $40,000 of the work, or we could pay them $50,000 a year and continue to provide loose leaf pickup. I mean, that's the real trade-off.
Yeah, I was thinking of painting and cracks and stuff, but you're right, the Weston
And
Sampson's the bigger piece.
And those are offset, so all of the other outsourcing
Yeah,
and the cost of a bag leaf pickup. It's about $12,000 to $14,000 on each side of the scale, so those two are a wash.
yeah, okay. Okay. So, and is that decision to, so you outlined those three scenarios and the service and budget impact elements. Is that something that goes before the town? Is it purely a BOS matter, coupled with FinCom recommendations and discussion? I mean, what?
Ultimately, it's a budget decision.
budget decision. It
It's a
doesn't
line
usually-
item budget decision on the DPW budget.
Exactly what I would expect, but why do I have this understanding that it like went before the town at one point? Or was it decided that it would be put to a vote at one point, and it was
I don't know exactly
discussed
how
and
it was
shot-
proposed to
and
town
shot
meeting.
down? But was it
Um,
ever?
What's that?
Was it ever proposed at town meeting to
I don't
be-
know the way in which it was presented to town meeting.
I
Whether
don't,
it was,
I can't recall ever a loose leaf versus a bag pickup being discussed
Discussion.
at a town meeting. I can't remember, over a course of 40 years,
I think they
how
switched-
loose leaf pickup got implemented. It was always part of the
Long-standing.
town service.
I think there was a potential cut of $37,000 in change proposed at town meeting. And the net impact of that was, we're not gonna hire, they had a retirement in the DPW, we're not gonna hire a new employee. And we're not gonna do bag leaf pickup anymore, because the staff's getting too small. So I think that's how it was framed at the time. A little different than this
I don't
scenario. But I don't know the particulars of
I don't either.
how, if it was just, going through line by line and folks knew well enough to know that if that DPW salary line was decreasing by that amount, that's what it translated to, or if there was a larger presentation, conversation around it.
All right, well, we don't have to talk about leaves all night, but we will talk about it, I'm sure, with Board of Selectmen, because it sounds like collectively, both the board and committee will help come to the right decision, given those three scenarios that Peter outlined. And then, so we've danced around a lot of these already in the list, and I think that's good, and then so maybe we can go to a sequential
Yep. review
review of them. And just, the way I look at it is certainly we're not voting tonight, so that eases the burden a little bit. We're not, we wouldn't vote on a line by line anyway until we get to the final roll-up of the budget, and we're actually crafting in those final steps to vote to appropriate funds for each of the line item budgets. These are even more granular than that, and will ultimately either not be part of the budget or potentially be part of the budget. And where I think, the way I look at it is, in the context of the big picture budget, current situation that we've talked about tonight, thinking about this with more of a fiscal kind of lens than a policy lens, but there are policy implications to this stuff, of course. Understanding that the Board of Selectmen is doing more of that, and to the extent we align with any higher prioritization emphasis placed on the importance of doing some of this stuff, to Peter's earlier point, there is some levy capacity, which, of course, as was expressed last night, and again tonight, would increase the school operating override. So I think the kind of general expression of kind of general support or lack thereof is probably what we're looking for for each of these.
Okay.
Does that feel right to everybody? Is that kind of what?
Sure.
Okay.
Thoughts?
And obviously, if we have questions, I mean, I think the list before us represents a careful consideration by each of the department heads of, not the aspirational, this is everything I could ever wish for, but what their actual needs are. And it was requested, right, of each of the department heads
Correct, yes.
specifically. So it represents careful effort and great rationale and justification that's been provided to us in person. And so if we do have questions, I'm sure Patty and Peter can help get that. But the categorization of the three, by the way, so we got new staffing, compensation, and expense increases, separate from capital items. Peter, any comments as to anything you'll add as to the way you've broken it down? I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
No, I think, nothing further to add.
Okay. So new staffing is about a third. of the total ask. So the way I looked at it is, and just thinking contextually of the budget, I mean, this is, each one of these is too small of a percentage, you know, such a small fraction of the overall budget. I don't think that really warrants looking at, oh, it's, you know, 0.1% of our budget. But I do think of them, I suppose, in context of the total ask. So if the total ask is 329,000, including the capital, should I not be including the capital here?
I look at, personally, I think there's kind of a bifurcation. There's the operating needs and the capital needs.
Agreed.
Yeah, splitting up the operating needs into different buckets, I think is helpful.
I do,
But
yeah.
I really think they're two separate conversations.
Capital's a separate matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's look on the expense side then. So, new staffing, we've got, part-time facilities, support staff. We've got increasing the, hours, for staffing for the finance assistant, payroll coordinator position, full-time police officer, part-time emergency management coordinator, full-time driver operator for DPW, as we were just talking about the leave. So let's start off on the facilities support staff position. That's Jim right now that does that, right? So, Bill Tyak presented on buildings and grounds, and this is someone who could help out in the support in the, facilities maintenance.
Was there an offset of contractual costs by adding these hours in that
No,
position?
this is a straight increase.
Straight
So
increase.
right now, generally speaking, there's a facility manager position, full-time salary, responsible for all the town facilities, so
Okay.
town hall, fire, police, council on aging, iron rail.
Just catching up with all the
Library.
increased work.
Yeah, but this is so, and we hire out for custodial services, that's subcontracted. And this position would be in addition to that, so, you know, not custodial, it's really a labor to help with general maintenance, preventive maintenance, basic work.
Wasn't this a person that would do the time-consuming work of painting and all that, which would allow the rest of the folks to focus on other things? So the part-time is just maintenance, repair type of functions?
Yep,
Would that be-
just basic maintenance and repair.
Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
exactly. And it's, the idea would be, you know, big picture to reduce the amount of time that we're subbing work out, the smaller projects, and saving some costs there, but there wasn't anything really specific in terms of savings that was called out.
But it does require someone with some mechanical skills, some,
This
mean-
is more labor than that. I think the facilities manager is gonna
somewhere
handle-
between labor and mechanical.
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah.
talked about painting,
Yeah.
fair amount of painting.
Yep.
That's really, if you think about it, just an extra hand.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
when you're doing any kind of project.
Right.
I concur with medium.
Yeah, the way I view this is, again, with that like fiscal lens, I will say that given it's not a strict mandate, but given our approach of starting with level services, and we're not looking to strip these out, but only potentially add them in, I am starting from the zero base, so to speak. And if compelled, the way I think of it is like if compelled to add, I add, otherwise I might not add, even recognizing that there's value in it. So I personally think medium-low, maybe, is kind of how I'm
And I'm jumping ahead can I jump ahead of the line?
go right ahead.
In this list. With what you just said, I think the one I feel the most strongly about, this full-time driver operator that's high, for me, that's low because I'm in support of shifting to bag leave pickup, which then affects that. I thought there was a compelling case made for it. The only thing I'm less clear on is what are the negative effects of getting rid? You know, are there elderly citizens who are going to have more of a problem with bag leave pickup? I'm trying to come up with the negative impacts from getting rid of.
I'm sure there are some, and I'm sure it's the strong preference of many, even who aren't struggling with bags, as you just were wise to point out that many might. would still indicate that, no, we should have it. So there's that preferential component to the service that will probably come up in our discussion with
It's a
BOS,
reduction,
but
in the end, it's a reduction of
It's a
level of
reduc-
services
it's a
that
reduction
we've
of level of
provided
service,
for
yeah.
many years.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's,
And I guess having lived in many different places and leaves were handled different ways, I think it's a luxury, basically. And I'm comfortable with switching to bag leave pickup, which would then change the full-time driver operator to low
Yep.
priority for me.
I would concur with that, and that's why I raised the issue around the loose leaf pickup.
So, does it, bless you.
Bless you.
Um,
You got your,
Let's continue then with on the driver operator, the laborer for the DPW. As Bill has outlined, Mike, do you have any thoughts? BOS have expressed a higher priority on funding this.
On which position now?
I guess I'm sticking with the driver operator just to wrap that one
At
up
the top.
before I jump back.
I would say a moderate, medium, kind of a,
The DPW?
yeah,
Okay.
yep. Yep.
but I thought the need for that basically would be filled if they had the extra 2-month
Yeah.
manpower, person power available, from not doing loose leaf pickup.
Right, so they're dependencies. So I mean, I think if we want to come out and say at this point, that's fine, that we would support, for example, option or scenario number 1, as Peter had outlined, which is to cut loose leaf, not add this,
Yep.
this additional staff, and save somewhere in the order of 40,000 in the operating budget. That could be our, lead-in recommendation, or our kind of viewpoint potentially, to the extent it's shared with the Board of Selectmen on this particular topic.
Yeah, and it covers other costs for stormwater compliance. It helps meet those other costs by, again, freeing up the hours.
Sure.
Yeah, I support Bill's proposal, just like you're saying, as an offset.
He's kind of got,
Yeah. I
I'd
mean,
say
if
his
I don't-
proposal, the way I view it, is actually an ask for another operator, with the caveat that,
However. yeah.
however, if it, so.
I think, not to speak for Bill, but I
Yeah, okay.
think in an ideal world, he'd say, his proposal would be option 1.
Okay,
Yeah.
Stop loose leaf pickup,
Yeah.
save $40,000, don't give me another staff
no,
person.
he was very
Seemed
matter-of-fact about, hell, we wouldn't need him if we didn't.
Right.
It's not like he was
I think
willing to
option
let that
2
go, so
is if
I'm
you're
with
gonna
you.
keep loose leaf pickup,
Then I need one.
I need another
Yep,
Yep, yep.
in that trend.
in which case, I actually was forgetting the health insurance costs. It's not a $90,000 swing, it's a $107,000 swing.
Huh? Whoa. What did you what did he just say?
The difference between the savings of,
Because there's a savings of $40,000 if you cut loose leaf pickup and don't hire somebody new. If you keep loose leaf pickup,
No.
you're keeping the same level of costs and you're increasing the pay, $50,000 for the employee and another 16 plus for health insurance.
60?
Which isn't another line item.
16.
16.
So $67,000.
Oh, thank you. There was-
$67,000 cost
Gotcha.
all in for that new position. It's in the fine print of the comments, but I think it's probably important to
versus a savings of 40,
40.
right, 107K
So
swing in
gotcha.
options.
Yep.
Which is,
Of all of these, I'm sure this is probably going to elicit the most conversation.
well, it absolutely will, because they're very, very, very strong preferences. I mean, I'm,
Strong preferences, but it's also a lot of
it's
big
about a
swing.
load of money, right. And so I'd err on the side of, I mean, I'll be out there with my blower regardless, and I guess I'll have to hire a landscaper to come pick them up. And actually, it's probably the right thing to do. But they're going to be very strong preferences on behalf of residents.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Right, and again, it's back
and I
to what we were
respect
talking about earlier.
both sides.
Yeah, is having people engage, which I'm sure hopefully they will at town meeting, on if they want to pay for this service
Yep.
or accrue savings that can be used for other necessities like stormwater compliance.
Yep, okay. So it seems like we see, merit to, bolstering Bill's staff and all the great work that he does, but fiscally, we're leaning towards not adding a staff member and cutting
Yep.
loose, entertaining cutting loose leaf
Just playing it out a little bit down the line,
Please.
I'd say that we want to be careful in terms of what we do with that savings.
Yep.
Because if we
Absolutely.
say, we're gonna save $40,000 and we're gonna fund
Yep.
2 or 3 of these other things with that money,
Yep.
and it goes to town meeting,
It's an offset that they have every right to view as such and question. Right. Yep. No, it's a valid point. And I think it's an understatement to say that there are strong preferences in favor of keeping
That there's
leaf
strong
pickup.
preferences for what?
In favor of keeping loose
Loose leaf?
leaf pickup at a significant cost, which it is already. Both
I
in
don't
terms
know.
of the burden on the
I'm
department.
not sure. I haven't talked to anybody.
Maybe not,
But it is a very nice benefit that the town provides, absolutely.
agreed, and anytime a nice benefit is potentially taken away,
And I would hate to see it taken away, but on the other side of it, it does provide us some room here,
it certainly does.
clearly.
So I think that's where we're landing, if I hear kind of in general, okay.
And I think, given the situation, we have to take
Yep.
that into consideration.
Yep.
Yeah, and I appreciate all the work that Bill Tyak put into thinking about this and trust his judgment, and don't want to speak for him, but it sounded like he was leaning toward that the other day.
Yep, be supportive of it, okay. Just to bounce back to first line, since that's where we started, before Carrie brought us over to, she wanted to express low priority as soon, early and often, which is,
See,
you're a
it's
fiscal
circled
conservative,
and
I
it's
like
in
it.
bold.
I like it, that's fine. So is there any, I'm just kind of thinking it's a medium-low, which is an L and an M,
for facilities.
medium-low heat,
I would say medium, not low, medium. I'd keep it at medium.
okay.
Yeah, I have medium, just unless I'm not understanding this correctly, by adding that person who can do this amount of work, it can help reduce costs later.
So that's
If we-
exactly,
If you
that's,
have, if
go
you
ahead.
have, if you have appropriate, upkeep, this 24/9
Yep.
can help.
no doubt, I would definitely encourage, the way I think about it is like the short-term and long-term financial risk of not funding this stuff.
Right.
Taking the policy piece or the justification out, because maybe there's not a whole lot of policy in this particular one embedded, but it's certainly
Yeah.
well justified to have additional work in a lean staff to begin with, taking care of our assets in the form of the buildings. But as Peter mentioned, if there's nothing specific and glaring, like a leaking roof, that will point to a potential cost, even if there's some uncertainty in the next few years, I'm thinking of it from the ground up, hence my
Yeah,
medium, low, and not flat out medium.
yeah, so I'm comfortable with medium-low.
And by the way, I think if we get the general kind of temp of the
Mood of the room.
committee, mood of the room, I think we're good.
Okay.
Patty, I tried to keep us away from your line item as long as possible. But you want to bump by 6.5 hours the assistant, finance assistant.
Correct.
And I recall you saying that's, a couple times you stated that's all the hours that were open, so we have, right?
So we would have coverage in the office for every hour that we're open for town hall, correct?
But no, never mind. 6.5 hours.
I think I'll just say kind of broadly, staffing in the finance office has been a moving target
Yeah.
over the past 6 to 8 years, probably even back longer than that,
Right.
in terms of who's in what seat, if it's subbed out or in-house, who's part-time, who's full-time.
Wearing different hats.
Yeah, so that has,
Overtaxed?
yeah.
I mean, literally and literally.
It literally is, and I'll be honest with you, when I came in, I had a very different, my position in my old town was I was finance director accountant. Very different combination than being finance director and treasurer tax collector.
Yep.
We, myself personally, can flip in one day from trying to focus on a big level budget to spending hours trying to get tax issues settled so someone can pass papers. We service all of a new hire, can take a couple of hours just trying to get them set up, trying to make sure we have a lot of retirees. Again, a ton of time. Trying to do some cross-training in the office, so if someone leaves or someone gets ill, we're not just paralyzed. Problem is, because of the state statutes, there's very little cross-training that I can do with the town accountant and vice versa. Statutes want those functions separate. So the person who's collecting the cash can't also be accounting for it.
Okay.
So we have to keep ourselves
Yeah.
very separate.
That's the real challenge of having such a small office.
Right,
Is there's a real separation of church and state
right.
between treasurer collector and accountant. So really the only person that's riding in the middle and able to have a foot in both worlds is this position in
Right.
terms of handling, you know, the administrative and clerical functions related to benefits and payroll,
Right.
let alone, you know, that's kind of the internal elements, you know, back office stuff with the employees, but then everything with the residents in terms of collection.
And, you know, make no mistake, this position, you know, it's called the finance assistant. This is not a clerical position. This position is doing almost the biggest chunk of our payroll. She is handling a lot of the people that come in, both situations, issues, all the municipal lien certificates we get, the endless calls we get from realtors and loan servicing companies, and we handle those together. But this is far more than someone who's just sitting there taking checks over the thing and recording them.
Yeah, I'm supportive of it, if it can contribute to the office running efficiently and effectively, and also help prevent staff turnover, since we have some turnover.
Yeah, and you know, we're pretty honest in
Yeah.
our conversation about this. Exit interviews from the past two folks who worked in the finance office was specifically around
Yep.
the workload
Yeah,
and lack of capacity.
yep.
Just a quick question, just so people probably would ask it. The person in this position has been here X years, I don't know. And the second part of the question is that the person in this position has received positive performance evaluations.
Person in this position is a relatively new hire, came on just before Patty, but
Right.
Patty was involved in the hiring process.
Yep.
So just since September,
No, about a week before me, so end of October she
October,
came
okay.
in. And then I started a week later, so,
So,
She
okay,
has
so
a
we
fine-
haven't
So-
done an evaluation, a 6-month
No,
evaluation, I suspect.
and I
that-
do want to make clear, for a couple reasons, that it really is about the position more than the person.
Right,
This isn't,
Okay.
this person does a great job, they're a really hard worker, they deserve more pay and more hours. It's a function of the capacity of the office and what the staffing needs are.
I just think it's important to
Yep.
to separate out those
Agreed.
Right.
those two issues.
and what this position is doing is really, you know, everything encompassing pretty much everything we do, between dealing with staff and payroll and benefits and retiring and dealing with the different, you know, the retirement board, as well as every resident that walks through there.
And I'll say just one last piece, independent of what the staff who did work in that office, their feedback. I'd also say that, you know, we've obviously had a fair amount of transition in the finance office. We've had some folks who've served on an intern basis, who've worked in other places, and that's top of their list of input to us, is to say, wow, you're not running lean, you're running too lean.
Yeah.
And so that's, you know, all helpful in terms of just like a neutral third party. They don't necessarily have any skin in the game, but they've been in the profession for a number of years, and that's the feedback they've given us.
And to be perfectly honest, I came from an organization a little bit bigger, but not too much bigger than here, and there I had a staff of 4. And that included someone who was solely focused on the human resources piece. And, I mean, we can do it with the staff we have. You know, the office it's a good office, and we can do it, but we just need a little bit more capacity in
Right.
there.
And I think, Jim, that was good that you brought that up and separated that out. This isn't a merit, this isn't a raise.
Right.
Right? This is
Functional.
Exactly, this
It's
is
a functional change, not change, but a
full-time
functional
employee, it's
addition.
relatively new. Things are obviously working well
Mhm.
with this employee. But that aside, you're looking to just meet the capacity, meet the needs of the town's departments and its requirements.
Mhm.
This department, the finance department, treasurer collector, accountant, I mean, this is where, if there's not insufficient coverage or something gets dropped, I mean, it can happen even when there is coverage, right? Mistakes can
Mhm.
happen, but this is a critical function of the town. I'm supportive of it.
I'm supportive of it.
When you say the position is benefit eligible, does that still mean that
Oh.
number reflects benefits?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that individual already already is benefit eligible, already receives benefits, so there wouldn't be that additional cost of, it's a 19-hour-a-week position, we're pushing over the threshold, now they're benefit eligible. I just want to make clear, it's already 30 hours a week, so they're already eligible for benefits.
Right, so 8,500 all in.
There's, 8,500 is the all-in number, it's not.
6.5 hours, yeah.
Right. Okay. Full-time police officer, patrolman, right, for the police
Yep.
department?
Yeah,
So-
I have this as high, just because I thought it was a compelling argument that was made at our briefing.
So, I do
Reduce
feel.
is this the one that was reducing the on-call ones?
Yeah, I will, I mean, we have heard, the chief's goal of, or the kind of the widespread across communities and within police departments, the goal of eliminating, like, it's not the first time I've heard, like, oh, let's get away from part-time officer, reserve officer
Yep.
only coverage, staffing during any point in time, weekend, night shifts, whatever it is. So that's not new. What is new and what I find also somewhat compelling is the recent hiring of, 80%
Two entry
staff,
level.
entry-level patrolmen.
Yeah, so the window of opportunity to accrue, are you talking about accruing
Yep.
this window to get that 46,800 decrease?
Right, which is
Yeah,
temporary in part because, as Peter had outlined here, even setting aside the health insurance,
mhm,
it's this person would increase by 5%
Yep.
for 4 years.
This person and the other two.
And the other two that were just hired, of course,
Mhm.
yeah.
Right, so that, I mean, it is a window, but
Right.
then it does then rapidly accelerate. So then you have
3.
where there's,
Yep.
once they're at that 100% level, then they're relatively static. There's COLAs and then there's a 2% every 5 years.
Yep.
So there's a window, but then it's gonna scale up quickly with 2 or 3 new hires in terms of, the police department budget isn't gonna be going up, the personnel line item isn't going to be going up 2%. It's gonna be going up more in the order of 4%. If you've got a third of the department increasing
Ramping
by
up at 5%.
7% a year.
Plus COLAs, right, exactly, right.
What I found compelling, though, and not getting back to this, was the issue of having the 2 reserve officers on overnight shifts, as opposed to a 1 full-time and 1
Mhm.
reserve. I thought it was an important argument to be made.
What, that the 2 reserve officers might lead to more liability or less?
That what? Speak.
Which aspect of the?
Oh, that to have a full-time officer with a reserve as opposed to 2 reserves. I would support having a full-time
Yeah.
officer.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing too.
I think the one nuance that wasn't necessarily raised in that conversation with the chief is not all reserve officers are the same. So there are some reserve officers who've been on the force a number of years, and there are some who haven't, just like full-time officers. There are also some reserve officers who work relatively infrequently, and there are some that work on a much more regular basis. And obviously their level of familiarity and experience and so forth varies. That being said, you don't know what combination of
That's
reserve
right.
officers are gonna be working along together.
That's right.
As well as full-time. If memory serves me right, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a full-time officer that hasn't been to the academy yet?
There's 2 full-time officers, both of whom were just hired this fall to fill those 2 vacancies.
So-
And they are both going to the academy.
Right, so they don't have the experience either.
But they're just starting.
Correct.
And
Well, but I'd equate that to a part-time who's been in the job, that I will outweigh experience any day over.
Yeah, and I'm not, I think we touched on this, I hope we did, but, I think the chief would agree that at this point, the department does not need another relatively new reserve officer to be hired from within to fill this new position. It would be hiring somebody off the street who's already gone through the academy, who already has experience, who wants to plug into the department, because, that's really organizationally where the value would come from.
See, my counter argument to this is what I still don't understand is the justification. In the sense of, if you look at the police logs, crime is pretty low, and I kind of equate that to the police here are very well trained, even the reserves, based on experience. They're very well organized, they're very well led. So I see those, that the way they have it today is a good deterrent to seeing a low crime rate in the police log. I still don't understand why the chief believes that after all these years I have 2 part-timers that may create a huge risk, and I don't see that risk, you know? And that's why I'm not fully convinced about the full-time. That's all.
It didn't strike me that he has like lack of faith or trust in his reserve. I'm sure if there were, I'm just completely making this up, 1 or 2 reserve officers that he didn't want to be next to in the event of something that puts their safety in jeopardy, that he would just say, well, they're on my force, so I gotta work with them anyway. I mean, I just don't see that happening. I think he was speaking to the differences in the way they attain the rates at which they attain their experience, the number of hours, of training, as well as on the job, to Peter's point about how some don't serve in the reserve capacity as much as others. But, and that was more of that sounded like a policing trend, sort of statewide, global level, that it's just a practice that lots of departments sought to do away with, because you can say it sounds good, it sells, right? I mean, it's a public safety matter, and people want to have full faith in their departments that are organizationally and structurally built in such a way that people are as invested as possible, and that's full-time officers, right? Generally speaking.
Yeah, and I think it's something similar to the conversations around having a single officer on an overnight shift alone, that most communities have done away with, almost all. You know, up in West Newbury, that's been a hot topic of conversation. But did it work for years well enough to have 1 officer on the loan? Yeah. Would it be better to have 2? Yes. And I think that's where this is it's not broken the way it is now.
Right.
But would it be an improvement? I think the chief feels like it is. It would be.
On the overnight shift, does Hamilton back us up, and do we back up Hamilton as needed?
So we always have a minimum of 2 officers on the shift at a time. And we
But even with that, does Hamilton back us up if needed?
so they always have they can always call on the radio on the shared frequency and reach out if there's ever an issue, and certainly anything cross jurisdictional, they do that on a regular basis.
Just the hard part is location in terms of where that other officer is. I'm just talking Hamilton, so there's a time.
Yep.
Time is of essence.
Okay, so we've kicked around a lot of thoughts on this. Just in summary, I mean, for me, I do find the timing compelling, but I also recognize, insofar as the newer full-time officers at the lower rate, and the 2 reserve officer positions that are open, that they're staffed for, would not be backfilled. Potential much lower than normal costs associated, generally speaking, for a new full-time officer. With that said, it's not a window that, you don't need this window to do it, right? You could hire a new full-time officer at any point and reduce your dependence upon reserve officers. Your net difference in that first year wouldn't be as great if all your other employees had ramped up to 100%.
Correct.
But thinking about where we are this year, next year's, FY '21 budget's gonna be also challenging, and those increases year over year would reflect in the bottom line for the police department. So I'm just saying it's a medium priority. I could be swayed. I definitely see the value in doing it. I think it's well justified. And there's some merit to the timing being opportune now, but not entirely, because we could do it theoretically next year.
I concur with that assessment, but with the others. Yep.
And I think just to be clear, that $21,000 number, that is not.
This year?
No, that is not specific to this year. That is not inclusive of the savings from those two officers coming in at the lower number. That essentially represents the $46,000 that would be reduced in terms of reserve officer
Right.
costs.
So let's switch that
Yep.
and move to the next year. Now, that is
Nope, still $21,000.
skyrockets.
Still $21,000.
Right.
If we do it this year or next year. There's,
No.
Yep.
I'm saying, if you did it this year,
yep,
okay, and say, yeah, I'm gonna do that.
oh yeah,
Next year is a real huge bump in cost, so now you're paying the full rate.
absolutely.
Working your way
Yeah,
up to
you're
it.
Yeah.
working your way up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep,
Yep,
okay.
Right.
you would have three
Yeah.
new officers, you'd have 3 of your 10 full-time staff
Right.
increasing by about 7%.
Because they get into the steps and the COLA.
They start at 80%,
They go to-
and then they go 85, 90,
95.
95, 100, and then they go, after they hit 100, then there's another 5 years, they go to an extra 2%,
Yep.
10, and so forth.
So this number represents the lowest year one impact to the bottom line budget for police, but doesn't account for those increases that we understand.
Right, but it also doesn't account for the window of the savings
Right.
from these new hires. I didn't want to, I wanted to be transparent and
Yeah.
say, I don't want to misrepresent, like, yes, that's a window, but we're gonna have those savings regardless. Whether we add this staff position now or in
Yes.
the
Yeah,
next
yes.
year or the following year, that's the bottom line.
They're
net
not,
impact.
they're not,
They're not linked.
they're not linked, right, right.
So if we
Exactly.
didn't do anything this year, and we put it on the table for next year, it would be that $21,000
Would still be the same.
Differential.
differential.
Yep.
Plus the benefits.
Yep.
Yep, I think it's good that you've explicitly stated that. Any other thoughts on, before we move to the next line item on the
Sure.
full-time patrolman?
No.
Then the emergency management coordinator, smaller ask, 6,250. I was in line with Board of Selectmen's overall thoughts as a lower priority. It's, again, thinking about the financial risks of not funding, not to say that there are not public safety elements included in this, certainly, and I think the chiefs have both commented that this is something that we should devote more effort to. Any other thoughts? Or please share yours.
Concur.
I concur.
Okay.
Jim?
Yep.
Okay. Guess what? We covered DPW.
Yes.
Yep.
So that brings us to compensation adjustments, of which there are 3 on the order of roughly $5,000 each. The first one up is $5,400 request for stipends for Board of Assessors, which is for the chair, $2,400 a year, and $1,500 a year for the elected, for the other 2 elected positions. All 3 are elected, right?
Yes,
No.
Yeah.
all 3 elected.
Oh.
So it's
Appointed, yeah.
the board is 3, right?
Yeah,
Members?
3-member board.
3-member board.
Yep.
all elected. And then added his comment that BOA previously had got some stipend.
Probably get hate mail for saying this, but why are we giving any stipend at all when no other board, except for the Board of Selectmen, correct me if I'm wrong, gets a stipend? Is
Yeah, I know,
that a
I'm-
safe, is that the right
I-
comment?
Water commissioners.
But they
share
pay for it
$2,
themselves.
And the other commissioners get $1 each, technically on the.
But the water pays for themselves, right? Yeah.
That's, yes.
So this
but
is, yeah,
They're $4 annual
I
stipend.
will get hate
I'll
mail.
pay it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the work that the assessors do, and they've been extremely helpful with our budget, the work that they do, but I just see it as low priority.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's setting a precedent. Why would we fund one board and not others?
I would concur with that.
Mhm.
I think they were doing a comparative to other communities and just throwing it out. I don't want to say that loosely, but these other communities do X and
Yeah.
we do Y, but I think we've got to continue to do Y
Yeah.
for the upcoming.
You know, I appreciate the civic responsibility and engagement that everyone on all the boards,
Yeah, absolutely. The effort they
Participate
put
in,
forth
yeah.
and the work they do is very
all the
much,
volunteer work, yeah.
yeah, worth calling out. But I,
FinCom Padres included.
yeah, that's right. And for the record, we have no stipends, nor will we ever.
And I think.
On my watch.
In most places, and the precedent, here historically was when there wasn't a staff person, this board, whether elected or appointed, was really doing a lot of that work, that function, the
Yeah.
assessor function. And so that was the rationale behind it. You heard the reason why it went away was because they hired a staff person.
Right.
And that's generally the precedent that's out there.
And I think you also potentially rule people, just as an aside with stipends. I mean, I couldn't serve on a committee or board if there was any stipend involved due to restrictions placed on me by my employer. And I'm sure there are lots of others who would fall into that category too. So you're ruling out, some people who might otherwise sign up for volunteer or seek to be appointed or elected in some capacity on those civic duty thingies. Okay. Town clerk hourly rate increase, $5,200, currently underpaid based on comp data.
They don't get 2.5%, sorry, let me start over again. They don't get 2%? They don't get a normal, everybody else seems to be
Everybody
getting.
gets COLA. Yep.
Oh, thank you,
So,
but
yeah.
this one doesn't?
No, they do.
Oh.
I think
Just unpaid.
what's different about this position is that when this individual was hired, it was a part-time position, we really weren't looking at the rate of pay relative to other similar positions, and that's kind of maintained its course along the past several years. And then in the context of looking at the increases to the minimum wage, we're kind of recognizing that this person was being paid closer and closer to that amount, and so had asked the town clerk to go out and get some comparable data for other similar positions, North Shore, smaller North Shore communities, our neighboring communities, to see.
Do you, without look, if you know, fine, if you don't, that's fine. What do they get per hour now, and they want to bump it up to?
What's
What
that?
do they get per hour now? Look at it
It's
roughly.
It was
It was 16.
16 and change
16
to
change.
22 or something.
21 and change.
21 and change. Can I just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the two positions here, Council on Aging and the Town Clerk, they have one low, medium, and one high. It would seem to me that we should be treating these positions with the same equanimity, if you.
It's the same ask. We're basically saying, we believe they're underpaid for internal equity and external equity.
Right.
We've collected data. We feel that the requested increases are consistent with that data. And so I would agree that if you're gonna,
You do one, you should
gotta
have
do both.
both at this,
there's no
same
difference
level
that
of
I could
importance.
discern in terms of their job function or.
those aren't union positions, are they? Or are
No,
they?
No, no.
No.
And I guess, you don't want to put in a situation where you have such disparity that it may begin to raise issues, that administrative assistants in the community are saying, well, why aren't we being paid at least
Yeah.
equally?
I mean, the town's remiss in hiring at that rate and maintaining it, instead of bumping it up slowly along the way to where it should have, closer to where it should have been without this big gap. I mean, the rate of increase is remarkable, which stands out,
It's a 20+%
30% increase in that. I know that we're not talking about a massive line item, but a 30% increase in pay, again, you're attributing it to, well, it was too low to begin with relative to comps, and that's why it's,
But the difficulty
the one-
is that we have administrative assistants, I think it was it the water department, that are already at that point and performing the same functions, or maybe it was the highway, I can't remember.
yeah, and that's why it's unfortunate we're at that.
So here's the one thing I will say. is,
Sure.
3 years ago, we went through, for the first time, a compensation and classification study and established, grades and salary ranges for each position, each non-union position in town. And at the time, we did all this. We looked at job function, we looked at internal equity, we looked at external equity. Had a consultant help us go through that whole process. But we didn't capture a handful of these non-union positions that were much more part-time. We just didn't look at them. And so that's where they kind of got lost in the mix, is that everybody else, not everybody else, but a number of other positions were brought up to levels that were competitive. And these, for whatever reason, mainly because they were so part-time, we just, we didn't look at them.
Okay.
And I think that's something that should be kept in mind, is that there were adjustments to a number of non-union administrative, kind of lower paying positions
Yeah,
a couple years ago.
yeah.
Yeah, you can, on those,
These were off the radar.
on
And
those,
these just weren't on the radar.
yeah, and all the, the graphs they have at the bottom of the sheets, that have
Yeah.
the line, you can see several years ago, a lot of the lines go up for salary and expense because of this,
Right.
trying to compensate people appropriately.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And
No,
it was
and
because it was arbitrary, and we were losing a lot of staff.
Yeah.
And that was the rationale.
I mean, it's definitely, it's like engagement in the workplace, it's retention efforts, it's
Yeah.
satisfaction of those who are doing a great job, as I understand this employee to be doing in town clerk, and it's not, and I'm not looking to suggest that you don't want to fix that gap of underpaying, you don't want to have that gap in the first place, and I think you just explained why, despite the market assessment and the rate adjustments to bring it in line. This is what are the hours? Simply?
Town clerk is 10 hours a week.
Well, it's 10 hours a week.
10 hours a week.
The
Yep.
admin assistant
Yep.
for town clerk, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, again, I agree with your point also that we gotta look at these collectively. If we have a handful, let's hope it's what's the third, by the way? So there's the,
COA,
Yep.
town clerk, assistant, and is there a third?
oh,
So
there,
there's an admin
Just the
assistant to the
stipends,
town
just
clerk, admin assistant at COA, and COA van drivers.
That's right.
Those-
van
so-
drivers.
But the COA,
Are on-
those,
They're on the
are they on
same
one
one.
line?
they're on the
Yeah,
same.
they're on the same line.
2 in the COA line,
oh,
and 1 in the admin to the town clerk.
Correct.
Yep, thank you. But I agree, Jim, with your point that we should be thinking of them collectively.
I
And
think that's the
that-
fairest way to approach it from a,
Yeah, and that they're helping residents directly, they're providing a valuable service, they're the face of the town, they take, This
in
is-
different
there's
ways,
pride
they're
in
both
this
very
work.
important. I mean, the clerk's office is the first one you run into. when
Yeah.
Of course,
when
yeah,
you
like
come
the
into town
face of the town, yeah, yeah.
Right.
And certainly, serving our senior population as well.
Yeah,
and
it's
with
pretty
the COA,
active
does
group,
great work.
pretty active group over there.
Yep.
Yeah,
I would suggest, from my view, I'd give them both medium high. Okay.
Yeah, I'm in that medium-high range too. Carrie, you had something, sorry. you were gonna say?
Oh, I mean, if we're having some lean budget years, I still think it's worth compensating people appropriately and keeping them happy if they're gonna be working really hard.
Yep. I mean, yeah, otherwise, you remain really underpaid, the person leaves.
Yeah.
The town hires someone adjusting up to where it should have been,
Mhm.
which is the equilibrium way that things often work.
Mhm.
That's how it does work by design, but at the same time, there's a downside to that. Right, in the form of turnover and
Yeah.
unhappy
Well,
employees, so
And
we're not
an
looking for
HR
that either.
person would tell you it costs X to address turnover every time you have a position, even an
Right.
administrative assistant. I don't know what
Last I
the X
checked,
is, but.
last I checked, HR is trying to pay us less too. Well,
And I will say, again, not about the person, it's about the positions. But all of these individuals who would be impacted by this change were there when we made all those adjustments to those other salaries several years ago.
yeah,
They were,
Have remained on the job, have remained underpaid.
right.
And
commitment and
so
dedication was
I
there.
think there's
And
something
I
to be said
understand
for
all
that.
Yeah.
three are good, at least good plus performers for the town of Wenham.
Yep, so I think then it feels like the mood of the room is in that kind of medium to medium-high range for
Affirmative.
both those two line items.
Mhm.
Fair assessment. And the one thing I'll ask Peter, just real quickly, do you happen to recall why, I was trying to narrow the column, and I think I put an ML for medium-low for BOS. I think they might have done low/medium or something.
For these,
For, for the administrative assistant to town clerk,
they were a medium-low.
whereas
on that,
higher for
and-
the other.
And a high
Yeah.
for the COA, so
Okay.
that was their feedback.
Not looking to reconcile
Nope,
that now, I was just curious.
that was what I had gotten from feedback.
Okay, whereas we are kind of viewing those in,
Yep.
to Jim's earlier point, collectively. This gets us through compensation adjustments and then into expense increases, of which there are three. 8,400 for IT backup disaster recovery services, 10,000 for tree planting, and 5,500 for part-time for 4 hours a week, consultant to support age and dementia-friendly community initiative, which, as Peter mentioned earlier, is kind of a continuation of the grant work, just retaining that service that we have. The first being IT, so
Is there a reason why that wasn't part of, excuse me for a second, let me back up. Why it's on the list and why wasn't it part of your regular expenses or costs? If you get a virus or you get a hack, you're pretty well hurt. So
Yeah,
I
so-
don't understand why
was it
it's
part of
here.
our IT contract?
Yeah, thank you.
That's a good question.
Or just it's part of what you needed to do.
Yeah, so I think, probably in the interest of being extra transparent. But I'll
Fair.
say that
Fair.
from my perspective, I think this is, a high priority. I don't think really should warrant a lot of conversation, frankly.
Yeah, when you look at the cost, if we do have a disaster,
Right.
the cost is gonna be a lot more than 8,400 to resolve it.
That's, the risk of not funding financially is quite high, and I view it as a
Yeah,
high
just in
priority
the
as well.
just in the manpower hours.
Yeah.
Lost hours.
It's a lot of
The
data
opportunity
entry.
cost when everything else falls to the wayside because people are trying to dig up records. Do you know, sorry, Peter.
Sorry.
Your timing was good.
To Mike's point, do you know why it wasn't part of like the micro center or whatever? Is it too niche compared to the basic IT support that, the stuff that's, taken care of in the contracts that we have
So
thus far?
you're looking at your IT director,
Okay.
and I went,
Whoa, something's wrong here.
So you can-
No offense.
That's fine.
yeah, blame me. So that's evolved in the time before I got here and since I've been here.
Yeah.
And I think really, what brought this to the forefront as I was going through a solicitation process, with our current vendor and a few other vendors that work in the municipal sector. And they all, actually had one of them do a pretty thorough assessment of our existing systems and capacities and some needs. And they came back and said, you don't have this. We really strongly recommend you do at this point.
Yep.
And this is the cost, and then I shop that cost around, very consistent, and very easy to compare apples to apples in this particular element of IT support. And so that's what it was born out of.
Okay. Thanks.
So, can I just ask, it's related, so do we have insurance coverage?
Yes.
For disasters and
Yes.
so on? So in our insurance policy, if you will, this kind of work is not covered?
Correct. So this is,
Or could we buy it in a policy at a reduced cost?
no, this is infrastructure to ensure data integrity and retention.
Yeah, it's like
That's
redundancy.
gonna be installed
Yeah.
and part of our systems
And mirrored
to
up to the
protect
cloud.
against
Yep.
disasters coming, as opposed to a disaster that happens, then they come and,
So a server goes down, they can spin up a virtual server that mirrors exactly what we have in place
okay,
back an hour before we lost it.
okay.
And we don't miss a beat.
Okay.
And we continue on while they work on rectifying.
So it's a
the issue.
proactive investment in our system.
It's, yeah.
You have a cloud backup with your phone for 500 gigs for a few bucks or whatever, right? And that's more than the town has.
Yeah, I mean,
In
to
some
be
way.
clear, we do.
I'm not
we-
trying, I'm
no,
not trying to
we-
like throw it in your face. I'm just saying like, that's why we need it.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we do have some, we do have
Capabilities.
some cloud backup.
Right.
But it is, mainly on the data side, and it's day to day, not hour to hour.
Yeah,
And there's not the ability to retrieve that
right.
as quickly. It's as much about retrieve, a relatively, easy ability to retrieve that data.
Yeah, you get that support when the server goes down to spin up a new instance and get back online with like limited downtime so that people aren't scrambling trying to figure out where everything
Yeah,
is.
you can equate it to like having an emergency generator. Power
Yeah.
goes out,
Yeah.
it kicks in,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you don't have to worry about that lag.
Right. Right. Cool. Seems like a pretty generally supported
Mhm.
tree planting. So we've had, I'm not gonna let us
Thank you.
spend an hour on tree planting, as we've done in the past. Mike can attest, in years past, we have, on a
Yes,
$20 million budget, spent an inordinate amount of time talking about trees. We love trees. My brother's a tree guy. He climbs trees every day for, prunes for Hartley Graymont. We all live here because we like,
Mhm.
right, the beautiful scenery provided by the trees. I think, I'm generally in support of it. It's in the grand scheme of things, I think that commitment to I hesitate to say environment because I mean the local environment of Wenham, right? Is, I think, appropriate to demonstrate in our budget at a modest level to show that we are replacing appropriately, according to a plan, some trees with the number is, what is it? It's like 20, right? 500 each or whatever. In and around town, I think that residents notice, appreciate, and do care about that sort of thing. I also recognize that in the grand scheme of things, there's no financial risk to not funding this. Could easily be picked up or doubled in the following year. You could spend $100 grand on trees in any given year.
Mhm.
And then it just calls into question in my mind, it's $10,000. We are here to build zero up and pinch pennies, but at the same time, if you're going to do it, you're not going to do it for a whole heck of a lot less than 10,000. Why would you allocate 1,000 or even 5,000 for 10 trees? I think it warrants consideration. I'd give it a medium to medium high as the BOS priority had done. If this meant a town operating override and we're right on the cusp, then no,
You'd what?
probably. Then I would say no,
Yep.
we could defer. But it's kind of maintaining in some ways, that level service as we had done before. So I'm kind of in that medium range, medium-high range.
I would concur with that. I would only kind of add to this is, I'm as concerned about trees that are weak and failing, because when those, and if we don't get to those, and they go down on the lines, then you have a whole different situation. So.
Sure.
But, what do we have in the 30,000 to remove?
24,000.
How much?
24
20.
for tree removal.
Yeah. So, but I'm not suggesting we move money around, I'm just a statement of,
Yeah, no, you're right, that's critical too,
Concern.
that's a safety matter. Gary, Mike,
My former colleagues would probably choke, but I used to work on environmental policy. I would move this to a low to medium.
okay. Lower priority for you,
Mhm.
Mike?
Confirm.
With?
Low.
Low?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're in the low to medium range, okay. You're maybe on the medium high.
Medium.
I think this is one of those things that we swayed, I'm not,
I mean, obviously, the
Fiscal
board,
risk
I think
is
the Board
low.
of Select feels strongly and probably leans more toward high, based on the little I know about the history of it. But
They were medium-high.
medium, yeah.
You know, I think the one consideration on this particular issue that I would bring up is the fact that just this year, Win Dodge created a new tree planting fund in memory of his father, Albie. And initial seed donation, no pun intended, of $5,000 to get that up and going.
Mhm.
I think we could certainly, we've talked about doing some real outreach to the community, do some fundraising and get some donations into that gift fund.
Yeah.
I
Is that a
thought-
C3?
What's that?
Is that a 501c3? It's
No,
not, right?
no.
Because it's it's government.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. but-
C4 or whatever.
Yeah, so it would be, my just initial thought might be you put $5,000 in and then you try to leverage that to the town's committing $5,000. Let's see if we can
Match.
match that.
Yeah.
Not draw down on the amount that the Dodge family put into that account, but try to leverage it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely worth
So
considering.
still
Yeah.
maintain some commitment to it, so it
Yeah.
doesn't drop off the radar entirely.
Right.
But, I look, and it is, in the end, I said the capital side is different than this, but I look at, funding this versus funding something like the COA roof, which is the Board of Selectmen's identified as a medium priority.
Yeah.
Say if it was, between those two, I'd lean more towards the COA roof, because I think that's something where, there's more of a liability exposure, right?
Yeah.
If we don't plant trees for a year,
Yep.
nothing's worse is gonna happen. If we don't put the roof on the COA and we have water issues and so forth,
That's
there
right.
could be real implications.
That's right, and I would also, I'm kind of leaning, I'm not going back on it, but I am saying I could be swayed into a lower, because you can do, and you should do more along the lines of tree planting. I mean, I wish you were in a position to spend 35, I'm not gonna say 150, but, 30, 40 grand on trees in the community. I think that, obviously, it's largely discretionary, right? We're not talking about contractual stuff here, but I think the community would benefit, but there's no risk to not funding this year from a fiscal standpoint. And you raise a good point, Peter, about Win Dodge, and again, we're talking about, longstanding, prominent community members who are committed to this as well, and it's nice to show that support too, so. All right, so we're in the low to medium range then.
So someone had, in the past, I think, I just would think there would be more nonprofits out there that would be interested in contributing or matching or tree planting. You guys have looked at that already? Did we talk about that last year?
We have looked at it. I think there probably could be some more time devoted to seeing what's out there for other opportunities. It feels like there should be more.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to identify any that really would be a good match for us,
Okay. The only
but it
one,
doesn't mean that they're not out there.
You're talking about local nonprofit initiatives,
yeah, I know in Kenya, there's a lot.
right?
You know, but I'm not familiar with local ones.
Even like Tree City USA, you'd think, oh,
Yes.
no, that doesn't seem like they really, that there's grant funding for street tree plantings through that
Right.
program.
And there's nothing, and what about transportation funds for greenways along roads?
I think that would be something as part of a larger,
I know that's a federal thing.
it would be part of a larger road project.
State stuff.
That then you could roll in some street tree plantings, like I'm thinking with the Main Street Traffic Improvement Project. Part of that would be landscaping, and so we certainly would be looking at street trees as part of that project, but not specifically, just for a random scenic road that there wouldn't be that there wouldn't be construction on.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Sure.
Lastly, the consultant for the COA for Age and Dementia Friendly Community Initiative, I support. I see that it's maybe on the lower side of prioritization by the board, but I think in general this is just an important part of the community. And to continue, there was a committee that was established or is being formed, right?
Yeah, so the committee's been established. The Board of Selectmen plan to make their appointments to that committee at their meeting on Tuesday night.
Oh, it's upcoming Tuesday.
So that there's this group, I say that, but there have been a group of residents who have been already involved and engaged differing levels, many of which have put in formal letters of interest to be appointed to the committee. So there's been work behind the scenes being done, not just by the consultant, but by residents.
Right.
But it's kind of being formalized now at this stage of the process.
So with this, the consideration description here, there's a grant in place that would continue after May, is that correct?
No, so we got a one-time community compact grant to fund two things. One, to hire the UMass Gerontological Institute to do a needs assessment. And two was to hire this consultant to help with doing the resident survey and the action plan and kind of staffing, supporting this new committee.
So we have
So
to apply for a new grant?
No, so that was a customizable grant program that the state has in place that we receive funding for. We can't go back to that same well to fund this position going forward. It would have to be it would have to be a different grant program, and there are no state grant programs for this kind of work. There are some through, I believe through Tufts offers something, but it's gotten relatively competitive. We've looked at a couple different opportunities, but there might be the opportunity to fund it with grant funds. We don't have anything lined up. So this would actually be a reduction from the 8 hours a week that the grant funding is supporting through this fiscal year. We're stepping it down to 4.
You're stepping it down to?
Down to 4 hours a week.
So it's 5,500 for a slight reduction in that, right?
Yeah, so
for
it's
halving
basically,
the time.
it's $11,000 for this person for this year at 8 hours a week. So we basically what we're saying is we want to keep this person on to continue helping support that effort, but at a basically half time of what they've done over the first year.
Well, from my view, it's an important initiative for the community. When the other night, I think the number of residents over 65 was 1,000.
Yep.
If I remember that correctly.
Yep.
And I think one of the suggestions for Jim Reynolds would be to try to develop a data track of utilization by the community out of that group. I think that'd be a helpful number to have.
Yep.
But I would give it a medium,
Medium.
you know, kind of, the Council on Aging has become, I think, increasingly active, and the outreach is a very positive thing. People using it, so that's my take on that. I hope we could continue it. And we may get a grant, too. I mean, that's always kind of out there, right? The
Yep.
possibility of that. Is Hamilton doing anything, by the way, with this?
We were, quite honestly, kind of on the leading edge of this. Salem was the only other North Shore town that had taken it up. We brought them in about a year and a half ago, picked their brain, the woman who led those efforts. And it's since really caught on, so Essex, Manchester, Gloucester, and Rockport are they're about a year behind us. They're just kind of wrapping their heads around and starting on the planning process. I was at the MMA annual meeting, Mass Municipal Association annual meeting a couple weeks ago, and there were 2 workshops just about you know, this initiative and, you know, various ways that it can be implemented in terms of planning and programming and zoning to support you know, more affordability for seniors. So it's really something that's catching on, you know, worldwide, nationwide, and now in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, I think, was the first, if not the first, one of the first 3 states in the U.S. to put in their to be designated as an age and dementia friendly state. So there's a fair amount of interest in the program all across the board.
You know what hasn't been explored in this? I was wondering if, and I can mention at the gym, is whether the First Church might be interested out of the funding that they have for community initiatives. Might be interested in maybe helping out with this in some modest way too. Because they are they're quite generous with their social services contributions with what the resources that they have.
Do they like to plant trees?
Excuse me?
Do they like to plant trees too?
They plant trees too?
Yeah.
No trees.
Okay.
So medium,
Feels like a medium.
Medium.
Is that, Carrie? Thinking medium? Wait,
low.
You wanna throw out a different, sway it?
No. I'm medium and, you know, low if we're really having a hard time deciding, that would come off.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're in line with the medium low then. Yeah, it's there.
Okay.
Great. Which leaves us with capital. So about 190,000 here. Hopefully we can looks like we can move through these.
the one thing I'll say on this, the chief brought it up when he was meeting with you last week.
Yeah.
Computers for
Laptops.
police,
Yeah.
computers for police cruisers, he said,
They're low.
they can wait.
They're,
So I think we could just
Yeah, that was
kind
Oh,
of,
that
computers.
tobacco can wait?
Generous of
Yeah.
him to volunteer that.
No,
Computers.
the computers for the police cruisers.
Oh, I thought I
I mean-
heard Bill Tyak say something that he get another year out of the backhoe. Maybe I'm making that up.
Yeah,
Well,
was just trying to
I
find the
didn't,
back
yeah, I
door.
mean, so the backhoe, I mean, so as Peter has said, the capital is gonna come back, right? Like, this will be the ask for next year if we don't, this year, right? Year 1, FY '21, because they need a backhoe. I don't recall, to be honest, if, I seem to remember asking if, like, what we can't do without the backhoe. And I don't recall, like, if this is holding us back from critical work. I know it sure as heck could without an alternative piece of machinery. I Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the mini excavator has been a great investment and
Yep.
has done a lot of, kind of become a go-to piece of equipment.
Right,
or
shared.
Where, that we, yeah, but
Water,
functionally,
Functionally
it's-
DPWs,
it's DPW.
fair enough.
Isn't this about, was this the one that was about 11 years old or so?
Yep.
Yeah. So you know what's gonna happen.
It's gonna break.
It's gonna
Right,
Right.
right when, right in the middle of you doing
Yep.
something.
Always does.
Always.
Yep.
Your windshield wipers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important piece here is that $40,000 is, you know, misleading. It's a $120,000 piece of
Yeah.
equipment.
Right, right.
You know, we've gone to this, you know, lease-to-own model
Yeah,
to try to smooth some of that without issuing debt for some of these kind of medium-sized pieces of equipment. So
Mhm.
not quite meeting the debt exclusion threshold, but not wanting to be the only piece of capital equipment that we purchase in any given year, Peterbilt and those kind of things. So we've kind of spread that cost out over, but, you know, we commit to it this year.
yeah.
You got another $40,000 in there for next year and the following year. So I think that is important to keep in mind with this particular one, where all of the others are one-time costs.
Yep,
What, oh, the others on this list?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I'm looking at the other leases
We're in year 2 or 3,
in
right?
Department of Highway, yeah, we're in year 3 at 43,000 for Peterbilt truck, and year 2 for a front-end loader of 35,000, which in prior years we paid with free cash,
Yep.
which are in
Mhm.
operating budget this year.
Right, right. So increasing the bottom line in their, department. And how many years are each of those, roughly, does it say?
Of the ones that I just mentioned?
Yeah.
They're 5-year leases.
So they roll off in a couple of years,
Mm.
which might suggest that the backhoe,
Yeah, 3 years for the
if,
Peterbilt
if,
truck.
if it can wait. And I'll be honest, I mean, I know, you know, Bill does an awesome job with his department and taking care of the town. I don't know if I'm missing something that it's like, yeah, we're stuck without this thing, as we were, for example, with the trackless machine, right?
Oh,
For the
yeah.
RFT to fix that when it ate its own
Oh,
turbo.
right, yeah, the
Yeah.
trackless.
The all-purpose utility,
Oh,
sidewalk, snow blower,
sidewalk
mower,
machine, yeah.
cold patch or whatever. So
I think if we didn't have the mini excavator,
then we'd be stuck.
we'd really be stuck.
Yeah.
I think the mini excavator can sub in for a lot of what the backhoe has done historically.
Mm. Sure.
And so we wouldn't be in that bad of a position, or
Yeah.
nearly as bad of a position, without having that other piece of equipment, if there were an issue with the backhoe.
So in light of that, and perhaps in contrast to the higher priority placed upon it, BOS, I'm thinking it's lower.
Yeah, okay, good point.
It's just my take on
No,
it.
I agree.
That
I
one?
agree.
I'm thinking it's lower.
Lower than
From
median.
in my estimation, and that isn't to say that you can't state otherwise. There is, Mike alluded to it, there's financial risk to not funding it if the machine breaks. And we're out, we got an expensive repair on our hands.
Bill said that he could push this forward a year.
It's a sense I got,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Patty, I don't wanna put you on the spot, but do you have the non-excluded debt schedule out with you right now?
I don't have it with me right now.
Okay. I know there's a significant drop-off from 21 to 22. I think there's a decent drop-off from 20 to 21 in our non-excluded debt,
Yeah,
which would
right,
free up some capacity
right.
to make a purchase on that order.
Sorry,
Next
as a
year.
debt exclusion in 21? Or
No.
no, you're saying in operating? Yeah.
Within the operating
Yeah.
budget.
Right,
Um,
because we won't have the debt service on it.
So that's something that
Right.
we'll make sure that we have next Thursday,
Okay,
because I think that,
that would help
of
support
any of the capital, that I think is the one
most
data point
right
that would be
for it.
helpful to make a decision around that piece of equipment.
Thank you. Anything else on that, on the backup?
No.
We talked a little bit already about road capital. Did we,
That's just a decrease. As I read this, the total request was 90.
so we
You're
fund,
asking for 50.
there's 40 funded in the budget.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's 40 funded in the budget.
Oh,
The ask is 90.
oh, this
So-
is 11.
So we've said, this is to get up to the ask,
Yeah,
the $50,000 delta.
yeah. I'm in the medium-high range. I
Yep.
mean, I don't know what
Yep.
else to do about it. It's roads. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
That's, the pain that we're feeling here is having funded half of it with free cash last year, or a good chunk,
Right.
roughly half. We could have another number here, right?
Yeah.
Theoretically, we could,
Could be anything.
30 grand, potentially. So,
Mhm.
I am of the opinion that some portion of it needs to be funded. And I don't have any good reason to suggest something other than 90,000, which entails 50 additional on top of what's in the budget. So,
Is there a formula that 90,000 repairs X miles of road or anything like that? Is there such a thing?
Yeah.
probably, but,
I mean, obviously, the engineer will tell you that every road is different depending on drainage and road width and whether it's a full depth reclamation or just a grind and overlay, but I can certainly get some ballpark.
Well, maybe just in addition to that is, and maybe, I'm sure it's out there, is what roads need to be, is there a priority of what roads need to be worked on and how many miles they are, how much would it cost, so we could maybe say, maybe 30,000 would work this year as
I think-
opposed to the 50 or.
yeah, I think we,
I mean, I have no idea about what that all means.
when Cherry was done a couple years ago, right? Was it Cherry that was done?
Yep.
I remember Bill talking about I think they're kind of you save up, right, for that big stretch of road that you're doing a full reclamation on. And that's a big expense. I don't know if save up is the right term, but you plan for that much larger
Well,
expense.
yeah, you do. You roll over your Chapter 90 money.
The Chapter 90, that's right. Yeah.
This line is generally for road maintenance, not
Not
new
rebuilding,
construction.
Yeah.
Crack filling.
This is mainly,
Cracks and
yeah,
potholes.
it's crack sealing, it's smaller segment repairs, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we can certainly get you a ballpark for a full depth reclamation versus a grind and overlay, what the cost per mile, half mile, something like that.
Or what do we need to do? I mean,
Yeah.
next year, what?
Would we necessarily need all of it, is one question.
Or are there some roads that
mean,
are really,
presumably.
in very poor shape that need to have safety-wise, need to be paid attention to? I
That
mean,
aren't the state roads.
Yeah, that aren't state roads.
Yeah. Who pays for the repair of a road if the water main breaks? Did that come out of DPW budget?
Yeah, we've only had 2 water main breaks since I've been here. But, yeah, we do.
In close succession.
Yes.
All right. We're kind of in that medium range, right? Medium to maybe medium high.
Mhm.
Computers, I think we can skip over, given the chief's comments, that he can thankfully get another year out of them, which is welcome news. Protective gear and scuba stuff, well, less the underwater. I guess we probably won't be spending a whole lot of time on this safety protective equipment for police and fire, or for fire, rather.
I agree that those are high.
Not to say that we shouldn't have discussion if need be around what other options we should be thinking about in addition to funding these, or what, are we doing the right thing for the safety of, firefighters, and also thinking about planning of small, medium capital spends. Is there something else we should be doing, a different version or whatever, things I don't know what I don't know along those lines, but if this is what is needed, we need to get them. So why are they in this list and just not rolled up in the regular budget?
because it's not a ongoing capital need year over year.
No, I thought it was. I thought he said they're rotating,
So, so we're gonna, it goes in cycles, and it's more than every couple years. It's every 5 years. So this is a 2-year program, half funded in 20, half funded in 21, to get us up to where we need to be, and then we won't need to fund it again for another minimum 5 to 8 years, depending on the equipment.
Got it.
So it's something that's not normalized in terms of capital need
Yeah.
within the fire department budget.
And that applies to both the protective and the air packs?
Correct.
So they're periodic expenses large enough to be split over a couple of years. But thankfully, we don't need them every year, I guess, financially anyway, and they're keeping them safe year to year until they age out, and whenever they expire, then they need to be replaced.
But it goes back a little bit to our conversation about, backup and disaster recovery. Why is this called out separately when realistically,
Right.
it's something that we just should be doing and should be included in the level service budget?
Yeah.
Is in
We're
case-
calling it out.
We're just being
We're lean,
extra-
mean, and
extra
super
transparent.
transparent. Yeah. Yeah.
versus the police cruiser that is on a lease that it ends, so now you gotta go buy
Right, but the
another one.
police
But
cruisers,
it's on a,
the way that that's structured is, there's 3 cruisers, they're each on 3-year leases, so we're adding 1 new every year, so it's a
Ah,
normalized,
so
there's
it's
no,
gotcha.
Right.
Alrighty, thank you.
Right, there's no variation year to year unless the cost changes materially.
Just a quick, for protective gear and air packs, they don't, well, no, I shouldn't say that. Do they need those every time they go on a call, like a medical call? Do they take protective gear, for example, and air packs?
Mhm.
Or is it just when it's a fire I mean, I really don't know what I'm talking about.
They're probably in the truck, right?
yeah,
At all times?
They have to have it at all times,
where they're not,
I don't know.
yeah.
So that's a good point about transparency that you make. I mean, just in terms of our budget process and thinking about this whole process, we're spending, thankfully, we're almost done, but we are past the 2-hour mark, talking about detailed line items and what we are going to collectively with the BOS recommend and support or not for inclusion in our level services budget. With respect to something as critical as this infrastructure for the safety of our public safety employees, to be even deliberating at any
Yeah,
level, right? It just goes to show that there's no fat in the operating budget.
You're right.
Not that this would be, but to your point, I think most departments would just say, yeah, I need radios, I need guns, I need whatever, it's going in the budget.
Yep.
So that brings us to the roof replacement and carpet replacement. I'll just lump those two together, even though separate line items for 21,000 and 3,000 roof and carpet respectively for the Council on Aging.
I
Across the street.
would prioritize roof over carpet. I'm comfortable having carpet be low.
In a literal sense, sorry.
Don't want anyone
Must be
tripping.
getting late.
I mean, does it have any rips or snags in it?
No, and I think
Safety issue?
realistically, there could be other funding sources for the Friends of Council on Aging.
Yeah,
not
Friends,
that-
smaller
is-
spend.
No, there's no immediate, trip hazard,
And it's-
safety issue with the carpet.
And it's not embarrassingly unsightly, like, this thing's a disgrace, worn out, stained, yeah. I was kind of thinking the same. Not seeing it, that's lower. Small dollar amount, but every bit counts, so I'm lower on that. Where are you on the roof?
So what's the issue with the roof? It's old, is it leaking?
It's toast.
Oh, then it should be replaced, that's high.
Peter said it's toast when that question was asked.
I did say that.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, I
so,
would put that
John.
as high. I think that's an important piece of capital to prioritize.
Yeah.
Yeah, so feedback I've gotten from Jim Reynolds, Jim Politano, Bill Tyak, everybody across the board has said it was past its useful life 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
If it was light out, I'd say go take a drive by.
Yeah, I know,
On your way
I
out
took a
here.
look, it's too
I
dark.
have I think from a layman's perspective, you could say it is well over 20 years
It's
old.
toast.
It's toast.
I think
I
the
would place
American
that as
Legion was
high.
there when the roof was
Yeah.
replaced.
Yeah. And thinking back to the lens of, is there financial risk to not doing it? There is, of course. I mean, look, it's past 5 years. What roof around here isn't 5 years past its useful life? The reality of it is roofs don't get replaced as quickly as they should, and most thankfully don't leak, but eventually they do. And then you're stuck with the repair and bigger issues. So part of me always thinks, get another year out of it, but realistically, no, I'm supportive of it because it needs to be done, and I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Is that 21,000 predicated on multiple bids?
Yeah.
Oh, it is? It's what's the word I'm looking for? Solicit all
Prevailing
bids. No, the process for procurement.
Quotes.
Procurement.
Yeah, so
Is
when
it
it's over
subject to
10,000
procurement?
and-
It's
Yeah,
10.
so over
10,000.
10, you have to solicit three
Bids.
quotes.
And it is prevailing wage, which is why it's high.
Yep.
And then that's the main reason. If this was $11,000, which I think it should be,
Yep.
then it wouldn't be, well, we'd still be talking about it, but it'd be more reasonable.
I'm on a medium high on that particular.
I'm a medium high. Nothing really gets high, aside from maybe the 2 items above it. Right, just,
Affirmative.
yeah. You never get a 10. Thank you all for thoughtful discussion on that. I think we're well prepped to meet with the Board of Selectmen, who may or may not chime in and double tap YouTube for 10-second increments. And I learned that if you triple tap, it does 20 seconds. And then if you quadruple tap, it'll do 30 seconds or a minute. So the skip increment, you know what I'm referring to? You don't watch your meetings? I'm just kidding. I don't watch them either. I don't watch ours. I watch CPC and BOS and everyone else. YouTube channel, you know, when you, on your phone.
Yeah, yeah.
Skip
Sounds
around.
like you have a fun commute in the morning.
Try to pass the time. And no, it's not fun, especially last night with,
I've never done that driving in.
oh yeah, no, not driving. Oh, I don't drive in. I take
I
the
know,
train.
you do the train.
Yeah, I have listened to it on the car driving.
There's a clip
So
here,
that's
but I
fine.
guess I lost it.
Okay,
Oh, I wonder if I stole yours.
all right.
Motion to adjourn.
You have to watch out for
Uh,
me.
It's the only way I can keep this stuff.
Unless you get anything
I
else.
had a little.
All in favor?
Motion. Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,